Hi, my name is Jim Akers, and we are here in about week 7, I think, of the lockdown with the COVID-19 virus. There's a lot of discussion right now. People are talking about opening up, getting back to work. There's a lot of people talking earlier about flattening the curve. We were told at first that we needed to flatten the infection rate curve so that we could stay within our hospital capacity. Now, as we're looking at coming out, we're hearing that, well, we need to keep flattening the curve because that alone will save lives. That's not immediately obvious, and myself and a number of other people have said, why would it be different? Why wouldn't you just have the same amount of area under the curve? Everybody gets infected both ways, and so you're going to have the same number of deaths. I participated in an online discussion with a virologist who was saying that's not true. He said that if you're able to sneak up on herd immunity rather than just crashing through it, if you're able to sneak up on herd immunity, you can minimize the overall illness and loss of life. So I couldn't find any references on that. I couldn't get a better explanation, so I thought I would simulate it and try to test it. I'm a retired engineer, and I have a copy of Excel, so I built a simulation. And what I'd like to do is show you that simulation. I am going to make a copy of this available. I'm going to put it on Google Docs. I'll put a link in the comments. You're welcome to download it and play with it as you wish. But let me explain what I've done. First of all, I have a square here, or a box of 1,000 cells. Each of those cells represents a person. Just in the different states. N, the blue color, represents not infected. The red color will represent infected. The black will represent a death. That'll be a dead person. The green color will represent recovered. There are several different parameters. We have the initial percent infected. I've picked 1% here. That means that we're going to start off with roughly 1%, roughly 10 people infected. There are a number of random number generators in here. It will be more or less 10, and it scatters them randomly around in our simulation area. I can set the number of infection days. I picked 24 here because I'm told that's a typical COVID-19 course of time. Again, I can vary that. The percentage that will die if they become infected, I picked 1% right now. Again, I can vary that easily. The bottom parameter is the one that we're going to really explore today. This is the contact infection rate. At the moment, it's 8%. I've just done that to get a starting point. We're going to step down in that. We're going to start at 5% and step down in that number. This number represents the difficulty in the infection spreading. A higher number means that it's easier for the virus to spread. It means that out of 5 contacts, or out of 100 contacts, 5 of them will pass the virus, will become contagious. In this little world I've created, each cell interacts with the cells around it. Each of the cells, when one of them will become infected, it will interact with all the cells around it a number of times, and whatever this percentage here is will determine how well that virus, or how easily that virus, spreads to the other surrounding cells. This number does not really correlate to anything in our real world directly. It's not a it's a directional number, a conceptual number, but a smaller number means that we have done a better job of social distancing, isolating, and so on, a better job of protecting ourselves from the virus. A higher number means that it is easier for the virus to spread. Over here, this is a kind of a summary for the particular run that it will have just completed. So the current run, we had 1,000 people out of 1,000 infected, 9 died, and 991 recovered. Down here we have a data table day by day. It goes down for 365 days. To the right, we have a chart showing the daily infection rate. So this particular curve was pretty spiky, pretty sharp. Okay, I'm going to put a 5% in here. I've generally found it's best to click out of the that cell just before clicking the button. I'm going to click Run Simulation. Okay, here we go. It started. The red infection is spreading in the blue population. You can see some folks have recovered already. The red is continuing to spread. We've had a couple of deaths now. At 5%, I would expect pretty much everyone to get infected. Okay, so there we go. Everyone was infected. There were 0 not infected. We had 7 people die, and 993 recovered. Here is the curve, pretty sharp. Okay, let's try it at 4%. You can see again the infection centers spreading. And I think we'll probably get a very similar result here. You can see it's spreading a little bit slower than it did with 5%. We may not fully infect everyone. You've got a couple of bubbles up here where the cells were surrounded by recovered people before they could be infected. So that was kind of a little local instance of herd immunity. The virus couldn't pass through the recovered people that were around. We had a total of 3 people not infected, 997 infected, 9 died. Okay, let's move it down to 3%. You can see how that curve was still relatively sharp here from the last run. Okay. Most everyone was still infected here. We had 8 people not ever infected. 992 infected, 7 people died, 985 did recover. The curve is still fairly sharp here. Okay, we should see a significant difference this time. You can see that it's propagating more slowly. The virus is having a little bit more trouble, a little more resistance. Okay. So we had a number, 43 people were never infected in this scenario. 957 were infected, 3 died, 954 recovered. So we did have a number of little bubbles where people were not infected. You can see the curve here is significantly broader in its base, more spread out. Okay, I'm going to try 1.5%. It's really starting to get a lot more difficult for the virus to spread. Okay, so now we've got some big regions where the virus wasn't able to penetrate. So we had 197 people never infected, about 803 infected, 10 died total, 793 recovered. Remember, when you're thinking about that didn't die here, though, well, we did have some deaths, and again that number will vary. But we had 197 people never infected at all. All right, I'm going to try 1% now. There you go. That's it. The virus couldn't spread effectively enough. It couldn't spread rapidly enough to even move out towards the edges of the area. It just died out. It started in a number of different places and then just were extinguished. The virus is gone. And we left 800 people not infected, 804 not infected, 196 were infected. No deaths. No one died. And 196 did recover. And you can see down here just how flat this curve was, how flattened it out it was. Okay, that's the model. Every time I run it, I get this data table here, but it also writes the data into a data table. And it just keeps extending this table with new data, so you can filter it. You can do pivot tables to look at how that data looks. You can analyze the data in any way that you wish. I'm going to flip over here to some static demo charts that I've created, because every time I run the model, it gets more data. So I wanted to have some charts that I knew what they looked like before I spoke about them. This is the daily infection rate. This was the 5% infection rate. The 4 is the blue. The 3 is the yellow. The gray is the 2%. The orange is the 1.5%. And then the blue at the bottom is the 1% curve. So you can see how as it becomes more and more difficult for the virus to spread, that curve becomes flatter and flatter. This chart shows the cumulative infection rate. So at 5%, it was very steep. It just leapt straight up and went to 1,000 very, very quickly. And there was no time for anything else. It just went straight up there. The 4% curve, a little bit slower. The 3% curve took a little bit longer, but still getting up to very close to 1,000. The 2% curve is right here, coming in significantly below 1,000. This was the 1.5% curve, where we had a number of people. We had roughly 200 not infected at all on that data run. And this was the 1% curve, where a large number were not infected. Okay, this is the recovered, which is kind of a similar situation. The not infected. Here was the table of the deaths. This is just the straight up deaths. The 5, 4, and 3% and 2% were all up in here. The 1 and 1.5 were down here. Those really have lower death rates overall, primarily because fewer people are infected. You just have fewer people infected. This chart shows the percentage of people who have, or the sum of the number of recovered people at the 1, 1.5, 2, 3, 4, and 5, comparing that directly to the not infected totals. Again, I'm going to put a link to this. You're welcome to look at it. I'd be happy to discuss and answer questions. I am going to extend this model a little bit. One of the things that I can do with it now that we're talking about opening up and getting back to work is that I can change this contact infection rate with time. So we can start off at a low rate, being isolated, and then open it up as things progress and see how that affects the situation. Thank you very much.